Being recorded, everybody. Episode number 44. Joining me today, my no less charming and also no less named Joe, charming guest co-host and R&R Film Critic, Joe Matz. Joe, thank you for being here.
Yeah, happy to fill the Joe quota for today.
This, yes, the Joe quota. We always feel it when Joe's not here, but we're gonna have a good show today. Really, the reason we wanted to get you in here is because for a few weeks now, you've been giving us some movie reviews, and you had an interesting comment one or two episodes ago where you said that focus more on what you say about the movie rather than the grade that you give the movie. That was you kind of gave a little caveat to your reviews, and I thought, it'd be
Yeah.
interesting to actually have the critic explain some of the rationale behind the grading that goes into it, and give the audience some background about what goes into you writing a film review and what you do and don't take off for. I thought that'd be kind of fun. Our music critic for now is chosen to remain anonymous, but our film critic is brave enough to put his name out there and say bad things about movies. I mean, it always takes a bit of courage to do. No, I'm kidding. Um, let's start, Joe. You and I have been friends for a long time, and you've been doing probably movie reviews for maybe longer than we've been friends, or somewhere around there. I mean, you've began kind of writing these as Facebook statuses, and
I
it
mean,
kind of grew from there. I'm gonna turn it over
yeah.
to you. Tell us, kind of give us the background of how you fell into the film critique, and some of the highlights of some films that you've reviewed in the past that kind of continue to push you in that direction.
Um, yeah, I guess, I just always really enjoyed movies. I've been someone who since he was like 10 years old watched the Oscars. Like I'm which it seems like fewer and fewer people are watching these days.
Yeah,
I'm still
we just lost half
but
our audience on that. That's fine. That's fine. Go ahead. Go ahead.
but yeah, I've always really enjoyed movies. I'd say probably I got more into TV and film criticism probably at the end of high school, early college. Honestly, like Lost kind of got me into that really hard because I feel like everyone who watched Lost, you had to read shit about it too because you're like, what are the theories? What's happening? And so that kind of what sent me down the rabbit hole of like following more reviewers, seeing what they had to say. And now on Twitter, like I follow a bunch of people who are always talking about movies and TV shows. So that
Does
just kind of built it up.
Well, so let me ask you this: does it take? Because so you're a fan of film. That's obvious. Yeah,
Yes,
I know that
definitely.
you like watching movies, and also you enjoy critiquing movies. And it seems to me that those are slightly at odds with each other, right? I mean, as a fan, you want to enjoy the movie, and as a critic, you're kind of looking for what doesn't work. Are
Mm.
there movies that you're such a fan of that you try to very much, not put on your critic hat when you're watching them? Let me give you an example. I don't know,
Yeah.
F9, for example. I mean, something like that.
I have not seen F9 surprisingly yet, but I have seen all the rest.
Yeah,
And I think that's part of at least how I view it is you kind of judge each movie on its own terms, at least to a degree.
sure.
Like I'm probably never gonna see a Fast and the Furious movie and be like, that was an A plus. I love it, best movie of the year. But you're not gonna judge, Fast Nine on the exact same categories as you're judging Schindler's List. Like they're completely different movies. So so yeah, I think to a degree, I'm always trying to judge like what is the movie aiming for, and is it achieving that? And
Sure.
I'd say most of the Fast and Furious movies have done fairly well if you're grading them on that kind of curve.
Right.
So yeah, it's
So
not
except
like
for the second
you're
one.
never gonna watch them and be like, yeah, you're not gonna be like, this movie deserves all the Oscars, the acting's
Right.
incredible, this screenplay is the best I've had the pleasure of seeing in years. But
Right.
you go for that to have a good time and to have Dom talk about family while drinking
While
Coronas.
blowing a
So
skyscraper to smithereens and
yeah,
probably killing, 10,000 people. Yes. No, it's all about family. Um, I know one of your big reviews you wrote early on that got a lot of publicity, if you will, that kind of I would suspect made you take this more seriously was a review that you wrote for Wonder Woman back in the first one. Um, What was it about that review, or what was it about that movie that you think triggered such a response from the people that were following you already?
I mean, to be clear, it's not like I got some like major
Well,
insane
no, 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 no.
response. But
Yeah, all relative to the Joe Matz, following. But still, do you think that you found something unique to say about that movie that people thought, oh, that was an interesting take on Wonder Woman?
I'll be honest. I think that one was mostly just like, I think everyone, that was such a huge movie
Right.
in multiple regards. I mean, the first successful movie with a female lead in the superhero role. I mean, obviously we had like Catwoman, which the
Right.
less said about that movie, the better.
Right.
I'm forgetting the name of the Jennifer Garner one. That was a spinoff from her Daredevil,
Oh,
but that
you
one,
mean the Oscar-winning Elektra? Yeah, no, that
yeah,
was
Elektra.
yeah, genre busting. Yes.
And then Wonder Woman also had the upside of being like a success story for DC, which still is a few and far between.
Yeah.
Although I haven't watched Suicide Squad yet, but I'm excited. But yeah, that one I don't think I had anything amazing to say about it. It was just like I wanted to say something about it because I thought everyone's talking about this. I'd like to contribute my thoughts on it. And then so yeah, on my blog, that was I believe the first full movie review that I did. And I've generally previous years I've been doing like here are the 10 movies to look forward to this summer, more so than looking back and critiquing movies. So this was kind of a switch for me. And then that same summer I did a Baby Driver review, which I mean, I don't think it's a surprise just because Edgar Wright's so awesome that I had a lot more to say actually about that one.
Right.
But fewer overall clicks on the blog because more people were excited to see Wonder Woman than Baby Driver.
Who do you think right now, kind of the feeling I get when I look at trailers for movies, and obviously there are exceptions. I know my wife feels the same way, probably even more strongly than I do. The lack of originality, a lot of remakes,
Mm.
a lot of sequels. Are you hopeful that will change? What are some trends you see for that particular? I would call it a problem to some degree because I think it is unfortunate that we don't have the originality that seemed to exist in the past. Although it's hard to know if that's really true or not. But a lot of sequels, a lot of major
Right.
blockbusters that are focused on action, etc. Do you think that will change, or do you think that's going to be the course that we're on for a little bit longer still?
I mean, I definitely think at least for the foreseeable future, that's the course we're on. I think this is something a lot of people who think about film a lot are talking about. And so before we got on, I double checked and got on the domestic box office on Box Office Mojo for 99.09 in 2019, since that was the last year we have real data for the box office. So 99, we had Phantom Menace as number one. So obviously that still is kind of a sequel type deal.
Right.
Toy Story 2 was in the top five. But in the rest of the top 10, you've got The Blair Witch Project. So just like a mini budget horror movie.
Right.
Runaway Bride, so original rom com. The Mummy, Big Daddy, Tarzan, The Matrix, the first Austin Powers, and The Sixth Sense. So that's obviously Tarzan's not an entirely original movie. The Mummy is at least semi based on old 1920s 30s movies. Those are pretty original movies for the most
Right.
part. Then we jump forward to 2009. You've got Transformers Revenge of the Fallen, you've got a Harry Potter movie, you've got Twilight. So you're seeing a lot, you're seeing more an Ice Age movie, which I don't even know what number Ice Age movie that was. So you've got more sequels moving in, but you've got The Blind Side, which I don't know that we're thrilled The Blind Side made the top 10, but it's an original movie.
Right. Right.
Monsters vs. Aliens. Star Trek's a reboot, but I mean, it was a real well done one. You've got The Hangover, so you still have a comedy in the top 10. You have Avatar, you have Up. So there's still a decent amount of original stuff. And then we move all the way up to 2019, and the picture's changed a bit here. We've got It Chapter 2, Joker, which I'm sure some people will argue is some original thing going on. I don't think there's anything original about that movie. Aladdin, Spider-Man, Far From Home, Rise of Skywalker, Captain Marvel, Frozen 2, Toy Story 4, The Lion King, Avengers Endgame. The highest original movie is Us, which is number 12. So
Oh,
now the entire top 10 is we're remaking animated movies that are semi live action now. It's the MCU, it's sequels.
right.
So that's what dominates now.
And it's worth pointing out. I mean, the movies. I mean, I guess maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not just that they're in the top 10, but like they're making a lot of money. Like not only do it right, like they're making a lot of money, not only relative to other movies, but also just in general. The MCU is this, probably what $1 billion franchise or something. I mean, it's huge dollars that are going into this.
Right. That's the other thing is I think part of this is also a reaction to movies becoming more of a global market
Yes.
because, you know, if you have a drama where there's a lot of talking, that's not going to play as well in China
Right.
as if you have Iron Man blowing shit up.
Right. Or Revenge of the
So,
Fallen, where it's no dialogue. I mean, that's just really numbers like full, like go like whole ham,
right.
just going for robots destroying things.
So
Right.
I think that's part of it. What I will say is, I think it's a little bit depressing that we don't see. I think the mid-budget kind of drama has largely disappeared. Those movies that you used to see that would be made for 20 million, $40 million,
Right.
those hardly ever exist anymore unless
No,
unless you have a director who is pull or you're aiming for an Oscar. Otherwise, those movies don't exist.
okay, but doesn't that surprise you given the ubiquity of a little thing called the camera phone? I mean, why are we not seeing more? And I'm not the first person to say this, but
Yeah.
this is a point made by Christopher Nolan. Everybody's saying that, oh, everybody's an artist. Well, where are all the masterpieces? I mean, people can make a movie now for, very cheap. I know you and I before have gone to the art house in our hometown where they've shown, people that make independent movies. Why are we not seeing a surplus in the mid budget, or even I would even say low budget film, given that
Well,
presumably it should
right.
be easier today to make a movie than it was in the past. Now, maybe I don't know that to be true. I would suspect that that's the case. I could be wrong, but I would think that that's the case.
Well, I see that's what I would say kind of has happened though, is that now the middle budget has disappeared for the most part. Like you could those movies, if they're being made, are largely being made on like streaming services now. Like Netflix will
Sure.
probably fund if you've had success in the past as a director, they'll fund you a $20 million movie.
Okay.
But for the most part, those aren't happening. You either have big blockbusters that are 100 million plus, or you have these more indie movies that are a couple million at most.
Right.
There definitely is more experimentation with lower budget things. Obviously, like you're less likely to see those at a theater. I think those also ultimately usually end up on streaming. But like Steven Soderbergh, who did the Ocean's movies and stuff, he's experimented and shot some of his films on iPhones. Obviously, he wasn't just straight on an iPhone. He had like cameras attached that made them better and stuff like that. But he's experimented with it. I think every year you'll see some smaller indie films and you'll read about them. And you're like, oh, this was shot on an iPhone. Like, that's incredible. So I do think that's happening. But, a good example of why, all the extremes of you're either low budget or big budget is if you look at what happens with directors who make successful low budget movies. Like Colin Trevorrow did Safety Not Guaranteed. It's a movie I really like. Aubrey Plaza's the main star. Jake Johnson from New Girl. It's a good kind of rom-com movie. His next movie is Jurassic World.
Right.
And he before he had a couple missteps with some of his films, he was actually supposed to be the guy to direct the third Star Wars movie. You have Chloe Zhao, who just won the Oscar for Best Director for, it was a smaller budget movie. She's doing Immortals now, which is one of the next MCU films.
Right.
I'm forgetting the name of the director, but Boys of Summer was this really good, kind of coming of age movie with mostly like younger unknown actors. We had Nick Offerman and Alison Brie were like supporting characters. His next movie after he did that one, Kong Skull Island. Like,
right.
That's what happens. And you'll probably there's a handful of directors who are going to be like, no, I want to stick to making these low budget ones. But I mean, I think everyone's kind of trying to ultimately pull off of Christopher Nolan, where
right,
you make Memento and you catch people's attention, and then you make your Dark Knight movies, and now he can make whatever the fuck he wants. And he's kind of, I mean, I think he probably has more pull to make whatever he wants than anyone, like even more so than like a Spielberg at this point. Because, I mean, I don't know how Tenet actually came out budget wise with how weird the COVID stuff was with affecting box office. But every other movie he's made, whether it's original or it's a franchise, has been successful. So I think that's what everyone's chasing. And normally I think you would see that build up where like you'd make an indie movie and then they'd give you a $20 million movie. But now it's just, no, here you go. You have $150 million. Don't fuck it up.
Now, maybe you don't know this. This is a pretty detailed question, but I'm curious when directors, I imagine for a low budget movie, a director has their hand in a lot of things on the set. When you have $100 million movie, you have thousands of extras, dozens of main characters in some cases. Like something like Jurassic World could just be this huge operation. Does the job of the director change from the small budget to the big budget? And does that concern you that they're being thrust into this totally different world, and they're still being judged as a director, even though their actual job may be totally different on a big set versus a small set?
Right. I can't say I have like an amazing grasp of exactly like what directors are like I think each director is different too. Where some guys are more hands-on, like you'll see some guys, they'll be their own cinematographer. Other guys will have like a Roger Deakins that they want to work with every time, stuff like that. But I would have to assume, if you're going from a movie where the budget was $2 million to one where it's 150, you have to be a lot better at delegating.
Right.
Because there's just, as much as some of these guys are control freaks, and a lot of them really are, on some level, you're just going to have to trust people to understand your vision. And yeah, I think there is, an issue there where like Josh Trank, he made Chronicle, which was this like fantastic kind of superhero, low budget, like found footage type thing with Michael B. Jordan. And it was a really good movie. His next movie, Fantastic Four, they basically just kicked him off because they were upset with how it was turning out. And there's argument now because anytime a director gets kicked off their movie, there's always the argument of like, well, his version was going to be better than this piece of trash, which
that
we
sounds
just saw with
familiar.
Justice League.
Right.
Yeah. And I guess Zack Snyder and his fans were semi-proven correct. I mean, it was better. I don't know that it was worth 4 hours, but
it was better. But how low was the bar?
Yeah, it was pretty low. But yeah, the point here is, Josh Trank seemed like this promising director, and then you give him a way bigger movie to deal with, and it just kind of escaped his grasp. And I think that's the thing is these, as much as as they're trying to not gamble by only making huge movies that with pre-existing IP where they're like, people will come and see this. If the director fucks it up bad enough, it's not going to matter. If people are like, this movie's trash,
right,
they're not going to see it, which is exactly what happened to that Fantastic Four. So yeah, I don't think this is the ideal way for the system to work, but it is the reality of where we're at now. And it's not going to change unless people go and pay to see, more
something like that.
Yeah, unless you're going to pay. Yeah, like if you're going like back in the 90s, you're going to go see Julia Roberts and Denzel in The Pelican Brief, like, which even that is based off a book. But the point is, you're like really movie stars almost to a degree. I mean, they still exist, but they matter so much less too. Because it used to be like, oh, Tom Hanks is in this, Denzel's in this, Julia Roberts is in this, I'm gonna go see it.
Right.
Like, if you look, like pretty much every movie star that we have now, I think if you go through like their last decade, there's going to be some movie that bombed that probably in the 90s maybe it succeeds, but now people are like, I don't want to spend $15
right
to go risk it to see something I don't know what it's going to be like.
Well, and that's the other thing too, is I think a lot about the role of two things. The movie becoming every movie now almost feels like it has to be a brand to be successful.
Right.
Which I mean that it can't just be a movie, but it has to be a movie with some social media campaign, with some YouTube contribution, with, there's all these little avenues that it has to succeed in order for people to, in order for it to really make it, I guess. I just think of like how quickly we go through TV shows. Like they'll release a season of television and you watch it like in a weekend. It's like, well, that weekend you just spent watching, that was, a year's worth of work that you just knocked out,
Yeah,
through
right,
some
right.
binge watching. And it's it's the pace of consumption, I guess, that
Mhm.
that concerns me, and I think social media plays into that a little bit because um, the spoiler is such a concern now.
Right,
That the moment something comes out, either you watch it right away or it's completely ruined. And if it's a situation where they're releasing a whole season on the day on a streaming service, you run the risk of it being spoiled as well. It just
right.
seems like there's this huge demand. Like I essentially view Game of Thrones as just being like the last season. I viewed it as like an 8-hour movie. Like, cause like you want to watch, or not the last season. I got into Game of Thrones a little bit late, but
Yeah.
like we watched it just back to back to back to back, just trying to catch up. And it was just like a long movie at that point. It wasn't even like a television show. It was just like a long movie at that point. And when you think about like, all right, that was a decade's worth of work that you just knocked out in a
Right.
week.
Oh,
It
right.
just to me that just seems crazy. I understand why movie companies don't want to take risks when that's kind of what they're up against. That I understand their aversion because it's like, wow, you put it, it's your the rate of consumption is so high. It's how could you make anything original given that you have to make it so quickly? It's easier just to kind of churn out a movie
Right.
every year, a sequel every year, and so I understand from where they're coming from, but I do. Are there any who's the director that did The Killing of a Sacred Deer?
Shoot, it's Yorgos, and I'm gonna have to look up his last name. I think it's like Lanthimos,
But that's an original
which,
movie, right? That's an original one,
yes, he is. He's
right?
very much a guy working in a pretty original spaces, I would say.
Yes. So there are
It,
directors that are,
it's
I think, having some success. I think that movie did well. I don't know for sure, but um, there are still directors that are taking risks, it seems, with storytelling. I mean, I would consider Sacred Deer to be one of the weirdest movies I've ever seen. I mean, it's pretty bizarre.
right. I've seen 3 of his movies, I think, and the favorite is probably the least weird, and that's a pretty weird movie in and of itself. But I mean, yeah, you had The Lobster, which,
Oh,
right, where it's like you go to this place, if you don't find someone to be your spouse, then you turn into an animal of your choosing,
right.
which just sounds insane. Honestly, he was one where I really had to. It took me time to adjust to like what he's really doing. Like I remember watching The Killing of the Sacred Deer, and for the first half of the movie, I was just like, "What the fuck am I watching?"
Right.
And then I don't remember exactly what it was, but somewhere in there, I think it was like when
Yeah,
out
no,
of
so I can remind you when for you. It was when the kids turn on each other, and then you realize,
yeah, no, it
oh,
was
they're all just in it for themselves. Then it becomes
when
a
the whole right
competition.
the whole family's like trying to win Colin Farrell's favor to like survive. And it was just like, oh, this is just a super dark comedy, and now I'm in. Like, I get it. But yeah, there are people who are doing original stuff still. Yorgos is a good example. An interesting guy for me is the Denny Villeneuve, who's not entirely working in totally original places, because like his last movie was Blade Runner 2049, and now he's doing Dune. But what I like about him is he's kind of taking risks. He's not doing like, he's not just doing franchises that are recent that you're like, or no, these are $1 billion movies. Like, I mean, Blade Runner, I don't think even did that well ultimately, in a comparison to its budget at the box office. In part because Blade Runner is still kind of like, it's not really a mainstream classic in a way.
I
It's kind
think
of still kind of a cult classic. And I thought his 2049 was fantastic. I loved it.
I did as well.
But
And I think Blade Runner has such a cult following. We have a mutual friend. I won't give their name, but they said something one time that I thought was very brave to say about Blade Runner. It's a good movie, but it's boring. I mean, you just have to admit, I mean, you just have to be willing to say it and not.
I can understand that perspective.
And I thought, yeah, that's true. I really like Blade Runner. I also enjoyed Blade Runner 2049. The first one's a boring movie. That's fine, but it's it's a little boring. And it's still
Yeah, I can
I would
understand
still
that.
say a masterpiece. But I am hopeful that there will be more risk taking, and I'm hopeful that streaming platforms, particularly things like YouTube, I hope serve that role and give people a chance to put risk taking content out there. I do think it's important that artists feel free to take risks, but they'll never be completely free to take risks when they're making movies with other people's money. Right? I mean, there'll never be complete freedom
Sure, there's limits to it for sure.
compared to someone who's say like a painter, where because I guess I don't know for
Right.
sure. I would think like art supplies were cheaper than like a whole bunch of cameers or something, right? I mean, you can just afford to take more risks with the painting than you can with the film.
Definitely.
Let me ask.
To your real quick to your point about like also how like streaming and like our how TV kind of comes into this is you look at a guy like Alex Garland who did Ex Machina, which was a really original thing. Annihilation is based off of a sci-fi book, but my understanding is he changed a lot of the plot of that.
I thought
I
both
really
those
enjoyed
films
that
were good,
one.
by the way. I thought they were both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I think he's got a movie coming up soon, but his next project after those two was Devs, which was streaming on, I think it was a Hulu show. So sometimes you're seeing these people also, they're seeing that there's more creative freedom, even beyond just like making a movie for Netflix, but in just making a TV show sometimes.
Oh yeah.
Or like, Barry Jenkins, who, he's won an Oscar, he did Moonlight. Um, he recently did the Underground Railroad adaptation on Amazon, which is really good.
Hmm.
So I think they're seeing like sometimes sometimes the money is just better from the streaming places versus going to a studio if you're wanting to try to make something that does go a little bit outside of what's obviously popular.
That's a good point, and I think there's still really good television being made, and I think in a way making a television series is maybe a little less risky because you're making it episodically. So if you make a bad episode, you can learn from it and fix it on the next one,
Yeah, no,
right?
that's very true.
So, and I think you're seeing with things like Game of Thrones, and there are other examples, but you can make extremely high quality content on a television basis, episodes rather than a giant movie that's 2 hours long or something. Like I said, to me, I see Game of Thrones just being like one giant long movie. I mean, it's so well done. The production quality is so good. The acting is extraordinarily good. It's enjoyable. It's one of the few shows. I know people don't like the last season, but really they don't like the last episode of the last season. Like they like the last season. It's just like the last episode when Daenerys gets batshit crazy. They don't like, which is fine. Teach their own.
Well, and then the choice of who to put on the throne. I don't think anyone was like,
No,
"Oh, that
right?
was a good call." We've been
Yes.
building up to this. Let's go with the
No,
guy who we literally didn't have in one full season because no one cared about his story and it didn't fit with the rest of what was going on.
yeah, it's
Like,
that ending that kind of thing. When you have a show that built towards one main conclusion, like the very end, it's hard to make that satisfying because it's
it
been
is.
people that have been watching Game of Thrones for 8 years. I waited 8 years for this bullshit. This is what happens. Like, hey, what would you made you happy? Like, if you had won, like, what do you think's gonna happen? This is real. Remember now, but
The best is the people who name their daughters like Khaleesi and Daenerys and stuff.
right, it's like, oh, you named your daughter after a
Don't do that.
yeah.
Wait till the show ends. Be sure.
Yeah. No, I had one good feeling about Xerxes. I guess I really fucked that one up too.
Well, one thing I wanted to touch on real quick, just with
Yes.
you mentioned the money, which obviously the money is
Yes.
what drives everything.
Yes.
And I
That's
mean,
always a key part of our show.
one of the kind of sad things, but thankful that this woman exists, is Megan Ellison, and she is the daughter of Larry Ellison, so she's the daughter of a billionaire,
Right.
and she's actually become a major producer in film,
Mm.
and she's produced some things that were bigger movies like Terminator Genesis and stuff, but a lot of like really good movies that probably struggled to find the money, like The Master from Paul Thomas Anderson. She
Oh, I
produced
love
that.
that movie. Okay, let's come back to
Her from Spike Jones. Beale Street Could Talk, which is Barry Jenkins, who I just mentioned. Booksmart, which Olivia Wilde directed, which is one of the best comedies of 2019. Like, if you look through her producer credits, like, it's a lot of really good 20th Century Women, which is one of my favorite movies of the 2010s from Mike Mills. So just like a lot of good directors who probably would have struggled to like make some of these movies. She's been able to come in and throw her money around. So, I mean, I guess, you're always at the whim of billionaires if you're trying to make a movie that's worth, that takes 20 million or more dollars to make. So thankfully she's out there just kind of making movies that she wants to see made, which is awesome. But I wish there were more studios that were also doing this.
I agree. Okay, now that I comment on a couple interesting points. Okay, let's let's go to favorites. We have. I want to get to one other thing after favorites, but right now let's go to favorites. We've been talking about
Yeah.
trends in the industry, and it's always what it is. That's fine.
Sure.
There's still really good movies being made. There's still really good
Absolutely.
television being made. There's still good actors and actresses and directors and all the other stuff. Let's talk about favorites. I
Sure.
remember sending a text to you and your brother about 3 months ago and I made the argument, and I think you both said I was on the right track. I made the argument that the movie The Master is a perfect movie.
Oh, yeah.
That I watched that movie. Let me say something. I think I made this point on the podcast before. Let me make it again. I believe it is possible to make a perfect poem. I think it's possible to make a perfect book. It's possible to make a perfect movie. It is not possible to make a perfect TV show because it's just too long. There's just no way. Seinfeld is like,
Sure.
8 seasons long, however many episodes per season. It's too much. A movie is finite enough that you can really make it perfect. I think The Master is a perfect movie. I watch it. I think there's not a second of this movie that I could change. I think Paul Thomas Anderson is a genius. I think he has an extraordinary level of detail in his movies. I think he pays
Right.
attention to things in such a perfect way. Um, I think it's a perfect movie. I loved it. First of all, it's kind of a terrifying movie, really. Once you kind of realize what's going on
Definitely.
with it, it's a terrifying movie. Um, but it's a perfect film. That really wasn't made that long ago, was it? I mean, how long did that movie come out?
That was 2012.
2012. Well, how old am I? I don't fucking care about that.
So
It
it
was the
depends on your
60s.
perspective on whether
Yeah.
or not that was a long time ago.
It
I would say
was
no, but
it was a talkie. It was a talkie. Um, anyways, I'm teeing that up to say this. I know I asked you to come up with some of your favorites as well. Let's talk about some of your favorites. And I want to, before kind of turning it over to you for a discussion on that. There's a really interesting music review about a song called "Zombies" by the Cranberries, which is a very
right.
famous song. And
Right. It was in one of the movies I reviewed not long ago, the Zack Snyder
yes,
zombie movie.
yes. I almost said World War Z. No, not that one. The other one. Um, yes, it was, and it's a great song. And the reviewer of that song said one of the key things about Zombie is that it demonstrated the necessity of rock and roll as a genre of music. That Zombies couldn't have been a jazz song. It couldn't have been R&B. It couldn't have been a rap song. It couldn't have been. It had to be rock. When you're talking about your favorite
Interesting.
movies, when I think about Paul Thomas Anderson and The Master, to me, it shows why film is necessary. That movie couldn't have been a book. It couldn't have been a radio program. It couldn't have been a
You
song.
don't you don't think that could have been a book? I think it could have been a book.
No way.
I don't think that the book is as good as the movie because what Paul Thomas Anderson does visually is
Wait, so
incredible.
now I'm looking like a fool. Is it a book?
Oh, as far as I know, it's not a book.
Oh, God, I hope not.
Because I believe
I'm like a fool.
my understanding is, it's inspired by L. Ron Hubbard
Sure.
and Scientology.
Yes. Oh, yeah, of course.
And
yes.
then, obviously he put his own spin on it, and it's not, it's not a direct like this is what L. Ron Hubbard was like and stuff.
Yes.
But
right, it's kind of a loose.
But I could imagine someone writing a book that would follow along those similar lines. But to your point, though, I don't think it would be difficult to make that book as exceptional as that movie is, just because I mean, some of the shots that he has in there are just breathtaking.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then it might be,
visuals.
it's up there for the best, most well-acted movie I've ever seen.
Well, right. And again, further the meaning for the film, right? Because like the acting is captured by Joaquin Phoenix. I mean, does a phenomenal job. Philip Seymour Hoffman, whom I
Yeah.
adore, is phenomenal in that movie as well.
Amy Adams is
Yes.
great.
Oh yeah. So anyways, enough about me.
Sure.
I tee that up to you now. You sent me a list of your favorites. You know, let's talk about some of them. Saving Private Ryan.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Why is that one of your favorites? What does it do for a film that strikes perfection in your eyes?
Well, one thing one caveat I'll give about some of my favorites is I think it's probably about 11 years ago now, I saw something on social media. It was like, hey, name your top 15 films of all time in the next 15 minutes. Just write them down. Doesn't have to be a perfect list, but of course I overthought about it and probably thought about it for like 2 hours before I posted mine, because that's who I am. But so I posted that list, and then 5 years later I updated it, and I'm actually overdue, not almost a year now, on updating it again, because I was like, I need to rewatch some of these, because again,
That's
I
a pretty
overthink
long list, isn't it? 15. A decent list, right?
It is a decent list. But what I realized, especially on the initial list, is so many of the movies on that list were like 1997, 2001. It was like a bunch of movies that, like, maybe I didn't see them all immediately after they happened, because, you know, I don't think like a 7-year-old me was going to appreciate Good Will Hunting. But like within, you know, within a decade.
Joe, it's okay. It's not your fault.
Thank you. But you know, those were all movies that I saw within, you know, like 10 years of them coming out. I was watching them at least by the time I was in high school and enjoying them. And so, you know, those movies have, you know, they're very good movies, a lot of them, but there's also that nostalgia factor.
True.
Like to your point about like, are there movies you shut your brain off a little bit to? Like, Remember the Titans is one of my favorite movies. I think it is, you know, a very well acted movie. I think the writing has moments. And then like the football scenes are awful. They're terribly directed.
They're gonna have like people like get CT to make a fucking movie.
No, I'm just saying that like you can't even tell what's happening. You can barely tell what's happening in some of the, like, it's just quick cuts. The guy gets tackled. Like, what happened on this play? I don't know. Like, well, you compare it to like Friday Night Lights, the movie, which goes a little too hard into like it almost has a video game feel at certain points.
Yes.
But like there's a visceral action to that the football plays in that movie that Friday Night Light or that Remember the Titans does not have at all. So
yes,
yeah, I think there's a nostalgia factor to some of these movies, and that's why on the next list I dropped some of them. I'll drop some even more. So Saving Private Ryan falls into that. It's 1998. I actually did see that when I was like 9 years old, and at 9 it was like incredible because Spielberg, the action scenes are just so intense, which when you're 9, it's just like, this is fucking cool. But what I've liked about that movie is as I've aged, now I appreciate it for different reasons, because now it's just like, my God, people went through this, and Spielberg does an amazing job of capturing it. You know, anyone who's read up on Saving Private Ryan probably knows a lot of veterans who saw that movie from World War II had to leave. Like, I know my own grandfather, my dad's dad, he almost had like some sort of breakdown where like I think they had to give him some sort of tranquilizer to calm him down. Like he couldn't watch the movie.
Right.
And he was, you know, he wasn't there on D-Day, but you know, he fought in the European theater.
Sure.
So I think, you know, there's
people who did. Right. I mean,
that's totally possible too. So and he was someone who didn't like to talk about it. Yeah. So I think there's that visceral action. I think Tom Hanks in that movie is so good just because he really captures the like
everyman in a way that rises to the occasion. Yeah.
Right, which is what that war was. So many of those guys who went over there, they never had plans of being soldiers before that war happened. And I think, you know, there's the sacrifice of it. And I'll admit, like, there's flaws to the movie. A lot of people hate the bookend of older Ryan. I think it's okay. It's not my favorite part.
Yeah.
If you break down the squad of guys, I think they're well written, but they are somewhat caricatures of guys you've seen in movies before, where you
Sure.
have the religious guy, you've got the guy who's always mouthing off, you got the supportive sergeant. Vin Diesel's just the Italian guy, because I think every World War II movie has an Italian guy.
Right.
So, there's kind of that, but the little moments of that movie also hit differently now too, where it's like, I know Giovanni Ribisi has a scene where they're all just kind of shooting the shit at night. And then he talks about how his mom would come home late at night from working and he would pretend to be asleep. And now he looks back on it and he just regrets it because he's like, she wanted to see me.
More moments he could have had with, right.
Yeah. And it's like, that scene has nothing to do with like the actual war or anything else that's going on. But I'm like, man, like that fucking hits.
There's not, well, no, it does. There's also a terrifying, very like brutally, intimate's the wrong word, but it almost fits. And I think it's the same person you're talking about. When that person dies at the end, when he's stabbed in the chest by the German,
Yeah.
they kind of get like in a one-on-one. The guy, stabs him in the chest. It's a gut wrenching scene for a couple of reasons.
Yeah.
Any kind of long, drawn out fight that it kind of comes down to endurance, I think that's a thing that we can all kind of fear. It's like imagine like struggling to like your last effort and it not being enough. It wasn't like he got shot, like quickly. It was like he was in a fight for like 5 minutes and he lost slowly. And his friend who was with him is being a coward on the staircase as it's all happening. Like that,
Yeah.
it's the whole scene. Um, I don't remember that scene bothering me that much when I was younger and I saw this movie. When I was older and I re-saw it, that scene was like,
it's rough. Sometimes like I don't even like watch that scene if it's on TV. I'm like, I don't want this in my life at this moment.
no,
But
and also,
what
let me
no,
say
you
one
go
more
ahead.
thing about
Yeah.
about the beginning.
Absolutely.
Steven Spielberg does such an excellent job, and I would also say so does Peter Jackson, of capturing grandeur in scenes and like really big scale.
hmm
The way that Spielberg captures the opening moments of that movie when they're landing on D-Day, I mean, you feel like you're there. I mean, to your
Right.
point
Yeah.
earlier about the veterans had to leave. I mean, anybody who hasn't seen this movie yet, I mean, it is. How did they even do that? I mean, the
It's
whole
incredible.
everybody's going up and machine gun fire coming down.
It's one of the great directorial feats that I've ever seen in any movie.
And it still looks great to this. Like I've seen the movie fairly recently, maybe a few years ago. It still looks great. Like it still looks good.
Yeah.
So, anyways, but
And
yes, back to yeah.
yeah. So probably one of the last things I want to say about it, because we've spent a decent amount of time on just Saving Private Ryan, is that I think people can argue about can any war movie be an anti-war movie? Like I said, when I was younger, I just thought it was awesome. And you can argue about he puts the sniper scene in where he shoots it through the other guy's scope, like that's just kind of cool.
Right.
And so I think you can level that criticism against it, but I think there's also the idea that it's just rah USA, and to a degree, I think it is a love letter to the guys who sacrificed.
Sure.
But Spielberg, and I'm blanking on who wrote the movie. Maybe it's Steve Zalian. I'll have to look it up. But I think it's notable that it's not like they don't interrogate things at all. Like I think Upham is the great example where he's kind of he's the angel arguing for the one prisoner not to get murdered on
Right.
Tom Hanks's shoulder. Everyone else is like, Giovanni Ribisi, their medic just died. They're like, let's fucking kill this guy.
Right.
And Upham's like, no, this is fucking wrong. We can't do this. Like, we're losing our humanity if we do this. And also, Robert wrote the movie. But
there's also little Easter eggs in it too, where like when they're talking and like you think they're talking at the very beginning. There's like a couple of prisoners are kind of like
the hands up,
right,
and they shoot him, and the guy's like, what did he say? And he's like, I washed my hands. They just kind of make light of it, and then. Right. Granted, this is a thing where you can't know unless like you read this later on or you speak Polish, which is that they're speaking in Polish and they're saying like, we're Polish, we don't even want to fucking be here, like,
right. Yeah,
and then they get murdered.
Yes,
and
right.
And then Upham, at the same time, he obviously has this coward at the moment, and I think part of that probably a lot of people just get angry at it. But I think part of it was we're supposed to be like, I don't know what I would do in this situation.
Oh, no doubt
Do
about
I
it.
think I would go up and try to save my guy? I think I would.
Right.
I don't know that.
No doubt about it.
Unless you've been there, you can't know.
Definitely.
And then after that scene, now that guy's died. The dude walks past him, Upham, and doesn't even pay him mind. And then we get to the very end of the movie, and Upham comes up on some German soldiers running away, and it's the guy that he let go earlier. And the guy's like, Upham, and Upham shoots him. And so now he's killed that guy. And I think, at least my experience, when you first watched, you're like, yeah, fuck
Right.
that guy.
But now you're like,
But then you're like, wait a second,
he's a prisoner of war. He shot a prisoner of war.
right.
Right.
Where Upham starts out as the most innocent guy, the one who's trying to argue for decency in war, and by the end, in part because of his own failings in battle, he is now committing a war crime.
Right. To feel better about himself, to feel tough, and to like avenge a friend, basically.
Yeah, which doesn't actually, like most vengeance, doesn't actually accomplish anything.
No.
So I think, Spielberg, the directing in Saving Private Ryan is phenomenal. I think the writing is really good, regardless of whatever smaller flaws it has. And then, I think it's just a really good examination of like what war does to people in some way.
And I think, to your point too, how the audience, how we respond to the movie over time is different. I would imagine a lot of people responded to that movie differently. What year did it come out again? You said
1998.
So I would imagine, post 9/11, there was probably a lot of, people watching the movie going like, yeah, this is it. This is how we should do it, and it's
Right.
It's an easy emotion to stir, and
it definitely is.
You had some other good movies on your list too. Lady Bird, which I haven't seen. What about Lady Bird put it on your list?
Lady Bird is just, it's one of those movies where when I look up how long it is, I'm always kind of amazed, because I believe it's like it's 95 minutes, and obviously that's including credits, and it fits in so much and so many characters that you feel like kind of who this person is, even if you get 2 minutes with them.
Right.
So Greta Gerwig wrote and directed it. She's also an actress, but this was her first movie that she wrote and directed on her own, and got a bunch of Oscar nominations. It's really empathetic towards every character in the film, which is something that I increasingly like, especially because it's like a coming of age story. It's this girl in, I think, like 2001, 2002 Sacramento, it's her senior year of high school. And it's just kind of following her and her relationship with her family and her friends at school. And I especially like empathy when it comes to movies that are like looking at people when they're in high school, or your early college years, any kind of coming of age thing, just because I think that there are villains in real life. There are people who are awful people.
Right.
But it's pretty rare for there to be true villains when you're like 17.
Right.
Like, a lot of us are assholes, but we're not we're not ultimately terrible people. Right. Because like Timothée Chalamet kind of plays this guy who's her boyfriend for a little bit, and he's kind of a pretentious ass. Like he's at one party, he's just out in the back, like by himself by the pool, just reading Howard Zinn. And which, like, that's something that tells you so much about that character in 5 seconds. You're just like, oh, this is who this guy is.
Right.
He's the 17-year-old reading Howard Zinn.
And like, he had to bring it to the party. Like, it's like that more of
right.
Like, he had to put it in his pocket. Like, he probably had the fucking like fat brick bird. Like, he had to fit it in his pocket, walk over. Yeah, no, it's the whole thing.
And it's one of those movies also that it's so well written, just even like the individual lines where she's going like dress shopping for prom with her mom, and the kind of major through line of the movie is her relationship with her mom, which is kind of strained. And her mom just tells her like, I just want you to be the best version of yourself. And she says, what if this is the best version of myself? which is like such a good, like, I think especially when
Right.
you're like 17, you're like, maybe this is who I am, and it doesn't, like, I hope I get better, but maybe
It
this is it.
almost it
Can
almost
you
has
accept that?
it almost has a kind of vibe from I Heart Huckabees. How am I not myself? I love that line in I Heart Huckabees. Just be yourself. How am I not myself? How am I not myself? How am I not myself?
Right. So yeah, for me, it's just like everything about that. That is a movie that to me is essentially perfect. Where
Sure.
like
And again, you see because it's shorter, 95 minutes. You can think you can probably make a perfect 95 minutes. It's not
yeah,
a lot
which
of time to screw around with. Basically, you got to get it right.
definitely.
I like that it's a good 90-minute movie. I haven't seen that one yet, but I want to watch it. I like
Yeah, definitely check it out.
directors that can do something in 90 minutes is impressive to me. That's in movies now seem very long, which I love long movies. I prefer a long movie, but I am always
Oh, so
impressed.
I prefer short unless you can really justify it. Like if you're a comedy and you go over 100 minutes, you need to have a reason. Which
Yes, right.
as much as I love, like Knocked Up and stuff, it's like that movie doesn't need to be 2 hours.
No,
It's not necessary.
no, I completely agree. I completely agree. I think comedies are best short. I think you're probably gonna only get a few jokes in there that are good anyway. So really, let's keep
Right,
it.
that's the thing too. It's like, you know, your hit and miss ratio eventually is going to go down. Like no one's that good. Like
No,
eventually you're including
you
stuff that shouldn't be there.
no, which is why I really my when it comes to comedy, I really love television. Like a show like Reno 911, where they pack in so much in 20 minutes, and like you really are laughing for 20 minutes straight because you're like, wow, like, they did it. Like it's all good.
Right. And like, we're kind of going on an offshoot here, but like look at Arrested Development. There were other issues with the Netflix version of Arrested Development. Like they had trouble getting all the cast together at one time, which is a key element of a comedy is having the cast interact. But also Netflix removed the restraints of time. And so now it was like you're watching 33-minute episodes, 35-minute episodes, and it's like, this doesn't need to be this long. Like it got
No,
more convoluted for no reason. Like sometimes having that tight 22, 23 minutes is what you
sure,
need.
right.
And especially like if you're renting a movie on demand or you're buying a DVD or whatever, if you have the choice between the regular version of a comedy and the like unrated version is almost always worse.
Right.
Maybe if it's PG-13, maybe it'll be better. If
Sure.
it's R, don't get the unrated one. It's just the version with all the jokes they didn't need in the movie. Like
The
the
ones I
40-year-old
thought,
version
right,
just has like 5 minutes of the two Indian guys swearing at each other. It's not good. Like you
right.
don't want to watch it that much. Like you're
No,
like, oh, this is funny, and you're like, oh, it's still going. Like it's unnecessary.
that yes, constraint drives creativity, especially in the
It does.
in the comedy world. That's definitely true.
Like
Um,
real quick, just on that point, is Netflix actually has a I'm forgetting the exact name of it. It's like how the movies that made us,
oh, right,
and
right,
it's a really fun look at like some of the classic movies I've watched, like the Back to the Future one, the Forrest Gump one,
of
Dirty
course,
Dancing.
right.
Like they have and they just dig into like how the movies got made, like how much they struggled to find funding sometimes, or with studio pushback. Where like I know Forrest Gump, like Tom Hanks and Robert Zemeckis, the director, both had to put in their own money at a certain point because the studio was like, we don't want to give you any more money for this movie. And so of course they eventually, they made a ton of money back. But
Oh, right.
when you look at some of the stuff, some of the things you realize is sometimes those restraints really do make the movies better.
Yeah, well, yes, I think this idea of the director's cut is I think kind of a gimmick sometimes. It's like they probably cut it for a reason. I mean, if it was like you're saying PG-13 to R is that's different. But if it's apples to apples on the ratings,
Yeah,
if they cut it, they probably cut it for a reason. I want to know what they cut.
exactly.
Let's talk a little bit about Almost Famous, and then I want to wrap up with some conversation on critique in general. So that was your last movie
Okay.
that you gave me, your top three, Almost Famous, which I have not seen, but I also want to
Oh,
see.
you haven't seen Almost Famous, Jimmy?
No, I
Hmm?
Lady Bird. I want to see Almost Famous. I want to see. There was another movie that I had want to watch for a long time that I finally did watch. Maybe it was The Master a while back, but It's on my list. Now that you're reviewing movies for us, you ought to give us a little, hey, we should watch these as well. Because,
Yeah.
not only a
So
critique, but also a suggestion.
so like Lady Bird, because Greta Gerwig did grow up in Sacramento around that time. It's it's not autobiographical, but there's parts of it that are. And so Almost Famous is about I think he's 15-year-old rock journalist who ends up kind of, the Rolling Stone actually gets confused about his age. I think he's an adult, and they hire him to follow this kind of mid-level rock band around. And Cameron Crowe actually was like a teenage rock journalist. I don't know how much of it is exactly is true, but so Patrick Fugit is the main star, and he's kind of a guy who just, if you saw his face, you'd be like, oh, I know that guy, but he never went on to be a big thing. Like he's the second detective in Gone Girl and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, that guy.
But I mean, one thing I'll say, just to show you the quality of the movie, Kate Hudson got nominated for an Oscar for this movie.
So I knew that she was in it. Yeah.
So Kate Hudson's a better actress than probably her reputation is, because she's just been in a bunch of trash rom-coms that no one was going to save. But I don't think she's anyone's idea of like, oh, this is one of the great actresses of the last 20 years. And she got Oscar nominated and arguably should have won, because she's fantastic in the movie. It's another movie that's just exceptionally well written. There's so many lines of that movie. Like if you ever heard someone yell, I am a golden god, that's from this movie. It's just kind of like the peak of a bunch of different actors. Like I said, it's definitely peak Kate Hudson. Billy Crudup, who's one of the more underrated actors, I think, of the last 20 years, just because when you cast him in the right thing, he's so fucking good. And he's the lead guitarist who's like kind of beyond skill wise of the rest of the band. And that's one of the conflicts is,
oh, right,
everyone else kind of thinking like, maybe this guy thinks he's better than us. Frances McDormand is in it as the kid's mom. She's fantastic. It might be, on a permanent basis, it's probably my favorite Philip Seymour Hoffman performance.
Oh, I didn't know he's in it.
Because he plays a real life rock journalist, and he kind of takes the main character under his wing and gives him advice, and has the best line of the movie, where I'll keep talking and I'll find the exact line because I don't want to flub it right here. But
radio. No, I'm kidding. Go ahead.
But one of the things I love about it is I'm not someone who's like crazy into rock music. Like, that's one of the things I love is when a movie or a show where it's about something that isn't necessarily like my thing.
Right.
And it can totally pull me in and just get me involved, emotional, all these things. And yeah, so here's the line. And so this is towards the end of the movie where the main character is calling him for advice, because he's like, I haven't written anything for this fucking story I'm supposed to do for Rolling Stone, because I've just been hanging around with rock stars as a 15-year-old. And so they talk to each, they're on the phone, and Hoffman gives him some advice, and he kind of thanks him because it's like late at night, and he's just like, yeah, man, like I'm always home, I'm uncool. And they kind of talk, and then Hoffman says, the only true currency in this bankrupt world is what you share with someone else when you're uncool. Which is just such a good fucking line. Like, that's one of those lines where you're like, if I go on and like were to actually write movies, I will never write a line that good, because it's just that fucking good.
Right.
And yeah, it's a really fun movie. It's a movie that justifies being like 2.5 hours long, even though it's like a dramedy.
Right.
Just because it's such a good time. So yeah, I would absolutely recommend that. Cameron Crowe is also a good example of, sometimes writers have a few essential things they need to get out and they need to make, and then they struggle to keep making really good movies.
Yeah, we were talking about one such director before we began recording. Let me ask you this, Joe.
Yeah.
I like that list you gave us. I have seen one of them. I will see the other two. I want to wrap up our conversation talking about standards critics use for critiquing movies. We kind of started talking
Right.
about you as a critic. Now I kind of got through some of your
Hmm.
movies. We kind of know you as Joe the critic, and now I want to get a little more out of you in terms of standards for film. Before doing that, I want to share a music review we have this week.
Yeah.
It is from our R&R musical correspondent. Before I read it, I'm going to pause recording for just 1 second because I think my washer is about to destroy itself. I'm going to come right back. We're going to do this. Give me 1 second. Boom, record. Sorry about that. I think my dryer must caught on fire. All is well. Okay. We have our music review today. In honor of talking about film review, we're talking about a film soundtrack today. This is coming from the soundtrack for The Big Chill. Notes, oldies, playlist of your dreams. Have you ever unintentionally experienced something out of order, like starting a show on season 3 or taking a left turn in IKEA when you should have gone right? This brings us to today's review, the soundtrack to the film The Big Chill, a soundtrack I've listened to 100 times before ever watching the movie. The Big Chill was released in 1983 and is a story of a group of college friends who are reunited at the funeral of one of their old companions. After the funeral, they all stay together for a little while to reminisce and enjoy each other's company. Relative joy of being together after so many years apart soon turns more serious. They begin to share their struggles with life, love, and general malaise of turning into an adult. Their feelings and sentiments certainly draw empathy. However, there is no resolution to any of their problems. The film forces you to sit with the issues, which can be mildly uncomfortable and a touch too real. One thing for certain about The Big Chill is that the soundtrack is phenomenal. It is essentially a greatest hits playlist of the late 60s and early 70s. The songs capture the nostalgia of the characters' formative years, but frankly, the soundtrack is also just flat good on its own. It is a 10-song collection featuring artists such as The Temptations, Aretha Franklin, Marvin Gaye, and Smokey Robinson. As a child, it was the soundtrack to family dinners, and I'm guessing if your parents are boomers, it was the soundtrack to your meals as well. I remember asking my parents about the movie, and they just shrugged and said, "It's an odd film, but I just love the soundtrack." So, according to my parents, the best way to experience the Big Chill soundtrack is with family and a lot of tacos. Thank you to the R&R Film Critic.
I,
I,
I can't argue anything with family and tacos. I'm in.
family tacos, I am in as well. Joe,
But
no, we're moving on. It's over. You missed
I
it.
was just gonna say that is a movie I have not seen and has been on my list for a long time. So I will have to watch that soon.
We yes. Well, Joe, it's a date. It's a date. Okay. Here's the thing, Joe. Here's the thing.
Hmm.
You write these movie reviews. Obviously, you're a fan of film. We kind of got over how you got started in the film critiquing world. Know a little bit about your favorites. It's a thing these days. I see it every now and then. I'm sure you've seen it as well. Very diverging opinions between the critic score and the audience score, whether it's Rotten Tomatoes or whatever
Sure. Yeah.
it is. We see this wide, and not always, but sometimes we see these wide gulfs between the scores. Is there such a thing as objective standards by which we should review films? In other words, can I say objectively a film is good and a film is bad? And I will get to why I think that question is important. I think the answer to that question is yes, and I will get to why I think it is important. But before doing that, I wanted to get your take on that question.
Um, I mean, if you really go down the philosophical rabbit hole, I suppose the answer is no, because ultimately it is all subjective to some degree. Um, I do think, though, we have generally held standards on certain things. Like, I think acting is probably maybe the one where you really do see a wide variety of opinions sometimes. Where, like, Joaquin Phoenix and Joker, was that the performance of a lifetime, or was that just a dude going way overboard? Like, like a lot of Oscar winning things, you'll see like a lot of time more acting seems to equal the best acting for a lot of people. I don't think that's correct, but that's certainly the case, not only among, the general population, but even among actors themselves. Sometimes it's just like, oh, this person's doing so much. That's so impressive. Where I think really, there is obviously value in that. But if you can really do something while not doing it, like if you can give me an emotional response without going overboard, if you can give me like subtle things, I think that's more impressive. But again, that ultimately is subjective. Yeah, I do think, we can all kind of agree that like, oh, Steven Spielberg is a good director. The guys who have directed Adam Sandler films are, mediocre and or hacks, like depending on how exactly
Listen, if
what you
you
want to
were
say
blown
there.
away by Grown Ups too, then I don't know what you're talking about. I mean,
Right,
is there
exactly.
a more
Like,
deserving movie of our attention than the sequel to Grown Ups?
so yeah, I think, I think we can find a general consensus on some things. I mean, there obviously are movies, like you said, there are movies that every year it's like, oh, critics love this. The Green Knight, which I did just see and was originally going to be the movie I reviewed last week before I wasn't able to. That's a movie that has, I think, like a 90% Rotten Tomatoes, like an 80 something Metacritic score, and it's like in the 50% something on Rotten Tomatoes for the audience score.
Oh,
And
interesting.
having seen the movie, it makes a lot of sense that is what happened, because it's almost like a mood piece more than like a true, like there's a narrative, but if you haven't read the like Arthur, because it's kind of like King Arthur, what the original story is one of his knights. This is like his interaction with the Green Knight. But if you don't know that background, which I only knew that existed, I didn't know the actual
Right,
story.
right.
It's kind of hard to follow some of the shit that's going on. Which again, that also brings up probably more critics were aware of this, because apparently it's like a story that everyone who majors in
Right.
English goes over
Right.
in college. So probably a lot of critics are English majors, or they're, are aware of this going in. General audience isn't. What is that? How do you grade the movie on that? That's a subjective question there, where should I have to know shit going in
Right.
or not? If I was going to grade that movie, I'd give it a B, because I'm torn between those two ideas.
Right. And I think that's actually a really interesting question. What is the expectation of the audience when you're watching a movie? What should they have to know? If your critique of the last season of Game of Thrones is that you didn't follow it, but you hadn't watched seasons 1 through 7, I'm not gonna.
Right.
It's not valid. He's like, you didn't watch the whole show.
Right, and that comes into, especially now that the MCU is the dominant
Right.
movie thing, dominant of movie culture right now, at
Right.
least, which a lot of the critics I follow are not thrilled about, for not surprisingly.
Right.
But yeah, if you haven't seen, like, I think that's a question with, as each of these movies happens, should I have to have watched, at least 20 of the 25
Right.
movies to understand what's
Plus
happening in this one?
the after credits. Should I have to watch the bonus features basically in order to find what's happening in the next one?
Which, yeah, I think that's a complicated question. It's one of the reasons I generally, like, if we were ranking MCU movies, I don't know that any Avengers movie would be in my top 5.
Because they all depend on the one before it.
Because I guess I do like Captain America Civil War would probably be in my top 5, and that one is dependent on you having at least probably have seen Ultron. If you haven't seen Ultron, I don't think that movie makes sense. But that, that movie does have that factor. But in general, I kind of like the more closed-ended, like
Yes.
this movie can stand on its own. Like I think Winter Soldier is probably the best one. I think Black Panther is up there.
Yep.
Thor Ragnarok, obviously it helps to have seen the other movies in the Thor
That
franchise,
one's
but
so
also
different than the
it's
other
totally
movies.
a totally different movie than the first two.
Yep.
So I kind of like the more closed-ended things
I think that's a really good point.
personally.
Even for people who like I like reading graphic novels. It's hard to find a graphic novel that you can just read the one of without having to read the 30 before it in order to know what's
Yeah.
going on. There's actually a really good standalone comic book called Marvels, which is a standalone, and I highly recommend. But for that reason, you don't have to have read the 30 years of comic books to know what's going on. If so, then let me ask you this: what is the role of a critic then? If you think that the standards are subjective, is it part of the entertainment experience that you have people kind of talking about the film in another light, or what are you trying to say when you give a film a grading? What are you trying to say um, about the film? Why give it a grade?
Um, I just kind of like being able to quantify things
Sure.
to a degree. Like I'm someone who, I mean, Letterboxd exists now, and I should probably be switching over to that because that's more of a communal, like everyone's discussing and ranking movies. But on IMDb for like probably 7 or 8 years now, at least, I rank every new movie that I saw that year. So every movie that came out that year, on their 1 to 10 score, which I wish it gave halves because I love to just have more variety. But so I end up with a million like sevens, 7 out of 10s. But I like to be able to quantify like, oh, how did I feel about this movie when I watched it?
Right.
And then it's sometimes I revisit them and I'm like, oh no, this grade was fucking way off. I will say you asked me earlier about trying to enjoy a movie while also trying to critique it. I do think that can be a struggle. One thing I've tried to do since I've started doing this for you guys is not really look too much at reviews before I watch it and write
Right.
my own.
Right.
Like sometimes, I've written some and then I'll read a little bit more about the movie to get more context and stuff. But I just don't want my own opinion to be swayed too much in either direction. But the biggest thing for me, less so than I know some people like, they're always like, oh, they got bad reviews, so you think it's bad because of that. I'm like, no, it's because the movie's bad. But my bigger struggle is when a movie gets amazing reviews.
Right. And you don't like
because that turns on the critique part of my brain
oh,
more than like
right.
if you're like, oh, this movie, if the movie is like, oh, it's 50% Rotten Tomatoes, it's a 44 in Metacritic, I'm like, all right, cool, I'll watch it, we'll see what happens. But I know like Moonlight is a movie I need to rewatch because I saw it one time in theaters. I respected the hell out of it. I think it's one of the best directed movies I've ever seen.
Yeah, I really
But there, I have my main issue with that movie is actually the way that it's cut into 3 segments.
Oh, sure.
Where it's like he's a kid, he's a teen, he's an adult, and it felt like each time one of those segments would end, well, the first 2, I guess, I'd be like building up this emotional response, and then it would cut to the next one, and now
Right.
I'm reorienting myself, and I thought that kind of undercut the emotional pull of the movie. But also, again, that movie had like a 98 Metacritic, and Metacritic, like Rotten Tomatoes, is just a binary. If you're looking at the percentage, it's a binary. It's did they give it a positive review? Did they give it a negative review? So if you make a good movie, it's not that hard to score in the 90s on Rotten Tomatoes.
Right.
Obviously, it's hard to make a good movie, but
right. If everybody says it was okay, 100% Rotten Tomatoes. Everybody said it was okay.
Right, like people look at like the last couple of Harry Potter movies. It's like they're all like 90 whatever percent, but like there weren't a ton of people being like, this is one of the great movies of this year. It's just like, oh, this is a well done movie. Whereas like on Metacritic, they're trying to gauge, like if we add up people's scores, like if they give it an 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10, whatever, what does that equal out to? And they do great. Like some critics get higher, playing a higher percentage. Like when Roger Ebert was alive, I'm sure his percentage was higher than like whoever was writing for Vulture. But like that was a movie that scored like a 98. So I'm going in, or Boyhood's another good example, where that movie was like a 98, 99. And so I'm going in, I'm like, this movie, I'm expecting it to be like one of the great movies I've seen this year, maybe in my lifetime.
And it was just an okay movie.
And then you see the movie and you're like, oh, it was good, but I'm totally blown away. And then that becomes like, wait, was I being fair to this movie? That's why I do think I always feel like I have a better grasp of a movie if I see it twice. Now, some movies you don't need to. They're clearly bad. They clearly are what they are. But I think a lot of movies, the way I'll receive them the second time will be a little bit different, for better or for worse. But especially, I think that helps me to like not be so overwhelmed with trying to critique it the first time. So I don't even remember what your question was before this.
Well, it was
Because I
so
went down such a rabbit hole.
no. It was a good. I think it was a good answer. So I was curious. So I think in general,
You asked me about the grade, right? Yeah.
but right. I think in general we should. I think as like a species, I don't mean this as you or me, but like as a species, we should try to understand objective standards of art in order to hold ourselves accountable for making good movies. But I would say as a caveat, not only that, but if we stumble upon objective standards for artistic creation, then it forces us to give the creator of that content respect, whether or not we want to or not. And I think that's really valuable in a time when we're having really important conversations around things like diversity and inclusion in the movie making world.
Right.
You can actually tell a group of people, look, even though that person's black, they made a really good movie, and you have to admit it's a good movie. You don't get to say I don't like it. It's a good movie, and even if you don't want to admit that, you have to, because we have these standards that we have that we can
That
show as a good movie.
that is also a good reason to ignore some audience scores.
Right,
Because
which is
you
the point
see
that I'm
these
getting to.
online
Yeah.
backlashes
Yes.
to, I mean, I think you can argue whatever you want about The Last Jedi. I think, there's a case to be made. It's like the best Star Wars movie. There's a case to be made. It fumbles a number of things. I'm kind of in the middle. I think it was good. It's probably the best of the most recent
Yeah.
trilogy. I think Rogue One's the best
agree
of the
with
new
that.
ones. But
I think it was among the best of the new, not as good as the original trilogy, which I think is fair to say.
But I also bring,
three were good.
yeah,
Yeah.
Sure. But I also bring that movie up too because I think it brings up an interesting question about what people want out of their movies. Because beyond, obviously, there was like the woke backlash to that movie, which is just stupid, that people are angry that like there's an Asian actress and a black guy, and like it's just like, all right, guys, sorry, everyone's not white, like tough shit.
But there's like, there's also like, there already were aliens, and then like, why is this?
Yeah.
Like, it didn't bother you when like Han Solo shot some guy with a fucking tube for a nose? Like that was like, that person in there. That person should have been a white guy. Like,
right, it's ridiculous. But I think that movie's more interesting from the standpoint of it challenges the audience of what they expect of a Star Wars movie, where you've got I can't remember everyone's names now, but Kylo Ren. So you got him. He's like arguing against the binary of like the Jedi are good, the Sith are bad. He's like, fuck that. Like you and me, let's create our own path.
right.
Like, that's a really interesting thing. The whole saga, and then this Rise of Skywalker really, I think, just shits the bed in this regard. Where Last Jedi tries to make this argument that like this isn't all about the fucking Skywalkers, and this isn't about like one or two families.
Right.
Like anyone can have the Force. I think that's a great argument. And then the sixth movie's like, no, fuck that. She's Palpatine's granddaughter.
I forget his name, the black actor that began as a stormtrooper. Why didn't he become a Jedi? They at one point he had a fucking laser sword even. Like it was like right there, and it just like went away. I was like, what?
Yeah, John Boyega definitely does not get the payoff he deserves, and that includes it to a degree in The Last Jedi as well. The last two movies kind of fail him to some degree.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that movie challenged what people. Or when you look at Luke, he's kind of this bitter old man now. I think it all tracks with like the story it lays out. I was fine with it. I'm also not a Star Wars.
Yeah.
I'm not a Star Wars fanboy either, though. So.
But
yeah, I think you get these questions of like, do you want to just give the audience what it expects and what it wants, or do you want to challenge your audience? Now, like if you look at Avengers Endgame, that clearly is a movie that just gives the audience what it wants. I think it does it very, very well, all things considered. I think it's a success in that regard. But I do think you want to challenge audiences, and that's something you'll see with critics, where if it gives audiences exactly what they're expecting, if it's very fan servicey, critics won't necessarily dislike it, but they're not going to rave about it. Whereas if you challenge what's expected, I'm more excited by that.
Oh no, I am too, and
I
I
think
think,
critics are, but not everyone is.
well, which is why I think, you know, if we could discover, let's say, objective artistic standards, then it would give critics grounds to challenge the audience along with the director. Where the critic could say, "No, guys, you're, reacting this way to the movie, but really, we can show you like this really is a good movie. Like you not liking it
Yeah.
is a feeling on your part." And I think it would be great to work towards that because then obviously it takes away all of the backlash that the nonsense that happens online, which is always stupid and
Right.
silly and holds people back. But
And
um,
it's not going anywhere.
no, unfortunately, but it would be a great to have another tool in, or maybe well, yeah, I'll say another tool in the tool chest of a way to rebut against that would be something
Mhm.
like, this is a really good actor because they do all these things really well, and these are the traits of a good
Yeah.
actor. Something like that. This is a good
Mhm.
story. Why? Because it has all these traits. These are traits of a good story. Something like that. Um, as another kind of tool in this fight, because I think it's an important fight to get right.
Yeah, and just to be clear to people, if you disagree, like if some movie is raved about and you don't like it, it's not automatically like invalid or
Oh
something.
no, well, because
Like
critics
it's
can also be
okay to be
wrong,
like go against the grain.
of course.
But I also think we have an issue in general when we talk about art between like it's good and I like it. Those aren't
Yes,
necessarily the same thing.
that's a really good point.
Like I do think there's kind of a reverse of that where some people call things guilty pleasures, and it often is like, oh, a rom-com is a guilty pleasure or a horror movie is a guilty pleasure.
And then
It's like,
it's
no,
just
some of those are just legitimately good. You don't have to fucking couch it and I feel
right.
guilty about it. But at
I
the same time, I can recognize like I love Love Actually. Does that movie have a lot of issues? Absolutely. Like it's okay to understand that like you can like something or love something
right.
and it's not necessarily great. Or
Yes. No.
you can dislike something and respect the hell out of like what they were doing. You'd be like,
Yeah.
this movie's well directed, it just didn't connect with me. That's okay.
I think that's a great point to, I think, bridge the two things that we're saying. That there is a role for objective standards and a role for feeling, basically, to put it, kind of lightly, I guess. Um, there are movies that we like for all sorts of reasons that have nothing to do with their artistic quality. We liked where we were when we saw them. They're a moment of nostalgia, like you mentioned earlier, Saving Private Ryan, or another movie. There is,
Yeah.
every art exists within an experience, and there are things that are part of that experience besides the content itself, and all of that will
Yeah.
impact how we respond and reflect on
Right.
that
Like,
experience.
but yeah, like I said, like earlier, one of the things I like about Almost Famous is I'm not a huge like music person. There's a reason I am not the music correspondent. Like I would be awful at that. And yet I love that movie. But also like I know like personally, if your movie is about faith in a challenging way, like not like a Christian movie where it's just like Christianity is great, convert. Like
Right.
I like
Go to
movies
Israel,
like
follow the
I
mountains.
really liked Silence from Scorsese a few years back, which is a movie that really I think interrogates faith, interrogates colonialism. But like, if you give me a challenging movie about faith, I will generally be in. Some people don't give a shit about faith. That's fine. They either feel so secure in theirs or they're so much an atheist that has no appeal to them. That's okay. There's
Right.
nothing wrong with either of those
Right.
perspectives necessarily. But like, that's something that appeals to me. So I understand and again, that's also why and I think any critic will tell you, read the review. Like when
Yes.
people are like, well, Rotten Tomatoes said this. First of all, like I always say, Rotten Tomatoes is binary. I like Metacritic more because it's not. But your best bet always, if you want to know should I see a movie, is you find a couple critics that either have similar taste to you or are good enough, writers that they can explain to you. You all have a good understanding of what the movie's like,
Right.
and just read those people, listen to those people. That's the best way to guide yourself. Like Barb and Star go to Vista Del Mar. It's fucking weird as shit movie. Like, if you're like, I never liked Kristen Wiig on SNL, don't fucking watch this movie. You're not gonna like it.
Right.
Like it doesn't matter that I gave it a B. Like you won't like it.
Right.
That's okay.
Right.
But like I think that's always one of the funny things is if you go to see a movie that is a little outside the norm, but is really well reviewed. Like I know Sam and his girlfriend at the time went to see Her, and
Right.
there's a scene in Her where people don't know it's Joaquin Phoenix in the near future, I think, and he's kind of got this AI girlfriend who's just a voice. And there's a scene in it where they have phone sex because that's the only way that they can have sex.
Right.
And Sam told me there's an older couple that just walked out in the middle of the scene. And I think that especially tends to happen with older people because I think they tend to like, they open up the paper. Maybe it's not the paper anymore, but they go wherever they go and they see like, oh, 4 stars. Great. I'll go see this. And it's like, no, you should probably find out what the movie's about first.
Right.
Because otherwise you could end up for a weird surprise. Like, I know like David Lynch, I haven't watched a ton of his things, but like Mulholland Drive is this super well-reviewed movie. I watched it. I was so fucking confused. I did not like it. Then I actually read the reviews afterwards because I just watched it on TV, so I wasn't like spending money. And they're all like, yeah, it's basically like a dream come to life. And I was like, all right, that kind of makes sense. That's what that movie is. I'm more of a narrative person usually. It's like The Tree of Life was another movie where it was like critics top #1. I think it was the #1 rated movie by critics that year, and I was like, it was okay.
Tree of Life. That one was
yeah,
Hugh Jackman, right?
no, that one. What's the Hugh Jackman one? There is some weird Hugh Jackman
It was
one.
like a tree that gives him life.
But
Interesting that we're thinking different movies.
that was like The Fountain or something.
The Fountain. That's right.
That
Yeah,
right?
I love The Fountain.
Yeah, Tree of Life is this wild kind of thing where it nominally follows the life of this kid, and his parents are Jessica Chastain and Brad Pitt.
Oh no, I know what you're talking about. Yes.
Yeah, he grows up to be Sean Penn, but it's like that movie is kind of like a poem as a movie, except it's 3 hours long. Where you literally see the creation of life, some sort of form of afterlife. Some people loved it. For me, I know my friend Cody, he wanted to leave halfway through the movie. I was like, we got to stick it out. But yeah, the point is, while there are somewhat objective standards, the way you react to it is not necessarily always going to align with that. That's okay, but just be aware of it. And then don't say, like, it's fun to just shit on movies sometimes. Don't get me wrong. Just be like, yeah, the movie's fucking trash. Right. But in reality, if a movie's got good reviews, it's usually not trash.
Sure. No, right. Exactly.
It's okay to be like, it's not for me. Here are the reasons why, and then still respect that other people have different opinions. So that's my thing is, I think most critics would say is, you're trying to create a dialogue about the films that you're critiquing.
Okay.
Like you're trying to add to it. No, I don't think anyone would say like they're the decisive, like this movie's good, this movie's bad. My opinion is final. It's you just want to try to guide people to have, just to make it more of a rewarding experience. Like even if and also some reviews are better read after you see a movie, depending. Like again, The Green Knight was a movie that I've really enjoyed reading about afterwards, and now I like the movie more. So I think it's all about creating a dialogue and just enhancing the experience. And then also, again, somewhat trying to guide people, because who wants to spend $15 and go see a movie you fucking hate?
No, right, exactly. I like that, Joe. I think that's a great place to wrap up. Well, like I said, we have really enjoyed your reviews so far. Any other things you wanted to add in today? Anything else people should know about you as they continue to see your reviews on our show?
Not really. I don't.
Well,
off the top of my head, we covered a lot.
Perfect. I like that. Excellent. Very concise. Good, everybody. Well, thank you for joining us.
I don't know if that's true.
That's probably not our most concise. Joe, before we sign off, do you want to give off any websites, blogs, Twitter, or whatever, anything for people to find you on?
If you go on a Spotify, there's sports on the IBN network. I think that's what you type in. I do a fantasy football podcast as well, and then I'm probably starting a second podcast that will also be discussing football during the season. So if you're into football, check that out. Otherwise, just stick around here. Obviously, you guys are covering a lot of different stuff that I don't know very much about. And then the music reviews are also fantastic. So,
Yes,
stick to this. And if you like football, check out the IBN network.
And give us that name one more time. You cut out as you were giving it out. Give us that fantasy football one more time.
I believe it should be it might be the IB network. It's IBN or the IB network on Spotify. I do the weekly, daily fantasy football podcast. So if you want to gamble on football this year, check it out.
Well, everybody, if you don't like gambling, a sure bet is our podcast, Roses and Rhetoric. You can find us out at rosesrhetoric.com. Follow our charming correspondent at Jose4_Squarevo on Twitter and Instagram. And of course, us on Twitter and Instagram at Roses_Rhetoric. Joe, we'll put all of your fantasy football stuff in the description below the video today. Thank you again for doing this. I am Jimmy Hackett signing off.
It's a pleasure.
Hey, this is a lot of fun. We'll get you back on soon, and we'll have a review from you for next week. Until then, I am Jimmy Hackett signing off for Joe Matz, saying ciao.